Good evening and welcome to the sixth and last virtual appointment of the Librorum for the year to presentation of some books chosen from those published by our members in FMA library. I inform you that the interpretation is connecting through the Zoom link. For Italian translation, you have to push ES, the Spanish languages, because in the Zoom it's not written Italian. To ask the floor, you must register in the chat. I'm Monica Baldi, FMA Vice President and responsible for communication, who strongly wanted this initiative, born this year, on the occasion of the 20th anniversary celebration of our association. After the success of the 5 previous editions, thanks to the welcome speeches by personalities such as the former President of the European Parliament, José María Gil Robles, and Enrique Baron Crespo, and the former MEP Astrid Lulling, is the turn of Cristiana Muscardini. She presents her new book, I nostri domiciliari, Our House Arrest. In this moment of continuous health emergency, we felt it was important to present a timely account of the facts and statements that took place in the initial days of the epidemic, as highlighted by the author. This event is organized by FMA in cooperation with the European Parliament Office in Italy, which I thank for allowing us to speak in the language so dear to Dante Alighieri, precisely on the 700th anniversary of his. It's a pleasure for me to give the floor to Alessandro Lombardo, head of the European Parliament Office in Rome.
Buonasera a tutti.
Yes,
Parlerò
hello to everyone.
in italiano, otherwise I will switch to English. Comunque, buonasera a tutti. Per noi come Ufficio in Italia del Parlamento Europeo è un onore poter ospitare la presentazione dell'onorevole Muscardini, che professionalmente rappresenta un pezzo di storia del Parlamento Europeo e personalmente anche per me è un piacere essere qui, perché non so se lei si ricorda, ma abbiamo lavorato nei nostri uffici fianco a fianco quando io ero nel gabinetto del vicepresidente di Roberta Angelilli. Quindi è un piacere e un onore per me dare un saluto per conto dell'Ufficio in Italia del Parlamento Europeo, in quanto noi come ufficio siamo qui siamo la casa dei deputati sia di oggi che dei deputati delle scorse legislature. Quindi per noi è importante essere qui presenti e poter collaborare nel futuro con le prossime iniziative. Quindi un ringraziamento ulteriore. Sono interessato a sentire l'esperienza dell'onorevole Muscardini e siamo tutte orecchie.
Are here now to see Ms. Muscardini. It's important for the people speaking to turn off the speakers when they're talking, because otherwise we hear the speaker and the interpreter at the same time. There are too many voices. Our relationship is based on respect and friendship. We met many years ago. He was the head of the delegation of Alleanza Nazionale. Unfortunately, no longer hear the speaker. Sorry, everything had disappeared. Now I can see you again and I can hear you again. But everything has disappeared again. Indeed, the interpreters have the same impression that it's a connection problem because there's a hiccup. And she always did it with an elegant and respectful way. She is a great woman, a great politician. She participated in building Europe, respecting freedom, democracy, human rights, and fairness. She has always had strong opinions on these points. She was a witness to the European construction. She was here for 25 years, 5 legislatures, and she especially fought to maintain the strong foundations of the European home, and especially for our historic and cultural identity. As she says, and I quote, Cristiana Muscardini has a very long and respectable curriculum. She's Doctor of Philosophy, a writer, a journalist, and a publicist. She is obviously a member of our association. She was full member of the European Convention from 2002 to 2003. She was a gold medal for European merit in 2005, co-chair of the UEN group between 2004 and 2009, vice president of the International Trade Committee between 2007 and 2014, and the member of the Intergroup for the Protection of Animals from 1990 to 2014. She was an MEP from 1989 to 2014, national deputy from 1983 to 1987. She regularly publishes Sociale Informazione Europa. She's a speaker at conferences. She studies social environmental phenomena and is an expert on issues related to terrorism. She also published Una notte di gloria, Il testimone, Largo neotico, Una parola per Caino, L'Europa sconosciuta, L'Europa in discussione, L'Europa in tavola, Politeisti assassini, L'urolato della memoria, Divergenze parallele, I nostri domiciliari. These are the titles of her many books. She is, as I said, a deputy and a journalist, and she is respected in all her roles. And I would like to give the floor to Ms. Bisceglia, who will present the book, which is very successful. Ms. Bisceglia. Can you hear me, Ms. Bisceglia? Now we've lost Raffaella. I'm sorry. It's probably me. I probably cause a disruption in the connections. No, it's because now most people are using this system for meetings, and that means that the lines are probably overloaded because I keep having internet meetings. So if I do it, you can imagine how many millions of people are doing it all over Europe, if not the world. Ms. Baldi, I would propose, while we wait for Ms. Bisceglia to return, perhaps we can give the floor to two ex-presidents who are here. We can give them the floor. Yes, indeed, that's what I thought we should do, Ms. Fonk. Let's give the floor to Enrique Baron Crespo, who had asked to intervene. And also, and Jose Maria Gil Robles, who is also online. Enrique Baron Crespo, you have the floor. Yes, thank you, Monica. And good evening to all. I would like to say hello to my friend and to my colleague. I'd like to say hello to Ms. Muscardini. Together, we lived through important moments of European construction. So even if we don't belong to the same political family, I still think we worked constructively. We worked together to move forward. Ms. Muscardini is very kind. She was always willing to move forward, to find shared terrain. I have not read her book because it speaks of the lockdown, as you say in Italian as well, right? You also say lockdown in Italian. And during the lockdown, we weren't living together. But in any case, it's an experience that, in my case, gave me time for introspection, to think of my life and of our European commitment. We have survived, and I see that Ms. Muscardini is in great shape. And I hope that we can continue to move forward for this common cause, a united, peaceful Europe. Yes, thank you, President. It's always a pleasure for me to see you again. Yes, thank you, President Enrique Barón Crespo. Jose Maria Gil Robles, I can't see him anymore. In the meantime, let's give the floor to Ms. Muscardini. And I would like to begin with a question as well, because her book is full of dates and important moments. It's interesting because there are also news items of the days dedicated to Falcone and Borsellino and what happened at that moment. She remembered how we all felt. She also refers to other important moments. She spoke of the humanitarian aid that arrived in Qatar. She spoke of virologists and how their opinions shaped the political decisions. So I would like to ask Ms. Muscardini, who is a very respected person, a person whose citizens also appreciate. But as Cristiana said, we need to consider the mistakes that were made as well. So my question is the following. What do you think of what's happening in Europe and the world? What would it be useful to do? Are we doing enough after 2 years of a pandemic? Have we learned from our mistakes? Are we able to create solidarity in order to be stronger? Do we have a health union? Are we active? So Cristiana, my compliments for your work, and I'll give you the floor. Yes, thank you, Monica. So first of all, I would like to thank Ms. Baldi. She kindly reminded me of how the book was a way to connect with my colleagues, with my ex-colleagues. I have to say that I am touched by the words of President Barón Crespo. I remember the years that we worked together and that everything we did to have a political Europe that still doesn't exist. And I would also like to thank Mr. Lombardo, who remembers me. I remember him as well. He was there in important moments. Now, this book was written because we mustn't forget, because people forget. People forget quickly. It's human nature. We forget even the negative things that happened. But when we forget, we can sometimes repeat our mistakes. Now, my choice to write this book is linked to the fact that we were locked in. We were in a house. I was luckier than many. I moved to my house in the country. And I was lucky because anyway, I had a garden and I could go into the garden. But if we think of people who live in a small apartment, who were stuck in such a small apartment with many people, this used to be a source of anguish for me. I was reading TV, newspapers, I was reading from the internet, I was looking at the news, and I felt like commenting. Now, what's important about the past, especially when we think of the present, there are historic mistakes. Countries did not have a health plan for a pandemic. Many countries didn't have this plan, and not even in Europe. It's still missing because if the pandemic is still here, it should remind us that we can have other pandemics. We need a health plan, an emergency plan. It means that we need emergency supplies in Europe. It means we have to get organized all together, all the member states, so that we have a specific plan in order to intervene quickly, in order for hospitals to be operational. This is fundamental, but it will be possible only if we move forward with a political union, because we've been talking about it for decades, but we haven't found any solutions. We haven't found common action. Now, the Commission has initiatives. They are good initiatives, but they also launch messages that the member states don't hear. They don't listen to them. The problem indeed is the European Council. If the European Council doesn't find a common position, at least on certain points, we will continue to have problems. And these problems are especially for our citizens. Now, on the pandemic, there was the WHO that made a mistake. They didn't say that there was a pandemic. They didn't launch an alarm, and they didn't speak of the transmission between humans. And we saw that it was an exponential growth. Now, the WHO is the World Health Organization, and they didn't say right away that we needed to use the mask as a preventive measure to avoid contaminating others. They didn't say it was useful because there were no masks. But this brings me to what I was saying before. There wasn't a plan for a pandemic. We didn't have masks. We didn't have the supplies we needed. But in any case, even if we didn't have masks, we could have told citizens, cover your mouths with whatever you find. Now, people made cloth masks. And they put diaper pieces. They used oven paper. And since they didn't say we needed a mask, the pandemic got worse. Then there were worse problems when Bergamo wasn't cut off. The virus exploded in Bergamo, and unfortunately, there was a huge number of deaths, even in Spain. And I speak of Spain since we have Baron Crespo here. Spain, like Italy, suffered the consequences of the virus. But now Spain is one of the countries with the highest rate of vaccination. Then there's Italy. In other countries, though people are discussing the problem, they are still behind. Even Germany, such an efficient country, notwithstanding Chancellor Merkel's appeals, only has 63% of the population vaccinated. And we have seen that there's been an exponential growth in contagion, in sick people, if people in the hospitals, and an increase in deaths. Austria is another case. They have introduced a lockdown for the unvaccinated. So this represents another problem. Is it possible that we stop freedom for a huge majority because there's a small minority, the no-vax, who are increasing the risk of transmission? Is it possible that they are creating problems for such a huge number of people who are vaccinating it, who are being cautious, who are wearing masks? The no-vax are demonstrating without masks. Now, to get back to Europe, perhaps Europe should think of the future, should organize itself for the pandemic, but it should also launch a campaign, an awareness campaign in favor of vaccinations. It needs to do this because in certain countries there is a huge increase in contagion. Romania, the Czech Republic, in other countries in Eastern Europe. We know that the virus crosses borders. We know that today, if we look at Romania, unfortunately, there were two people talking together. We know that people cross the borders. And on the buses coming from Romania to Italy, for example, there are no tests taking place. This means that contagion will continue. We need other people to turn off the microphone. Sorry, message from the interpreters. There are too many people with their microphones on. We hear President Gil Robles at the same time as Ms. Muscardini. Monica, I hope I have given you a satisfying answer to your question. Yes, thank you. I see that President Gil Robles is ready. Yes, indeed. Before giving the president the floor, Cristiana, you have the possibility of having two presidents. They rarely participate in all these meetings, but I would like to ask the Secretariat to turn off the microphones of the other people, so the participants as well. We need to have only the microphone of the person speaking. So we have Mr. Gil Robles, who will speak to us in Italian. He speaks Italian very well. He actually speaks any language. Go ahead. Can we turn on his microphone, please? Yes, now we can hear you. It's perfect. Thank you. I'm very happy to see Cristiana here today. It's a pleasure to listen to her, to listen to what she says. But we mustn't be pessimistic. We need to be optimistic. Notwithstanding COVID, notwithstanding this experience, we need to remain optimistic. We are alive. We are here. We're all looking good. So let's not worry. Obviously, we have lost many friends. They're waiting for us in the other world. But we're here. We're here to fight for Europe. And I see that Cristiana is full of life and that she's still full of the wish to fight for Europe. It's a real pleasure to see you. Yes, thank you, President. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. So now I'd like to give the floor to Raffaella Bisceglia because she has questions for Ms. Muscardini. And afterwards, we'll have our debate. Ms. Bisceglia, go ahead. Connection problem, I think. Let's try again. No. No, unfortunately, The connection is very bad. It's impossible. Yes, now we can hear you, though it's a bit complicated for the interpreters when we don't see you. This is a connection problem. Okay. So I would like to underline 2 points from Ms. Muscardini's book. She spoke of the problem of political union, but in the book, she also speaks of a fiscal union. So I wish we could speak about this as well, because this also had an impact on the management of the pandemic, on the issue of vaccines and the pharmaceutical industry. And plus, it had an impact on the health aspects of the pandemic, but also on the economic aspects of the pandemic, and an impact with our relations with China, because Ms. Muscardini also speaks of this aspect based on her experience, based on her studies, on newspaper articles. So there is the fiscal union, which is important, and the lack of this union has an impact. And then there's the issue of our economic and political relationship with China. And now we can't hear Ms. Bicheglia anymore. Yes, thank you. We've heard this very important question. And so let's give the floor now to Ms. Muscardini, and then we can open the debate. Ms. Muscardini, microphone, please. Here we are. On the issue of tax policies and fiscal policies, we don't have Pat Cox here, so we can talk about it openly. Because we know that we have Ireland that is against the harmonization of our different tax policies. Now, from the health perspective, Europe should try to obtain harmonization, because if we speak of health supplies, it's not possible that some health supplies are cheaper in France than in Italy. And this is true for the pandemic, but it's true for treatments as well, for other types of illnesses. We should have better prices, more access to supply. We can even speak of animal food. We can speak of treatments, of health treatments for animals. Now, we're all fighting against the abandoning of animals. But if an old person gets a dog, it saves the dog from a home, it pays the money, it pays, the old person will pay the veterinarian, but doesn't necessarily have the economic power to do so. Then there's a problem of ecosystems. It's just to say that everything is related. If someone writes a book on this topic, I would like to say something. If we want to speak of the ecosystem, it's obvious that our survival depends on the survival of animals as well. Because the protection of humans is possible only if we have health supplies at reasonable prices. Now, during the pandemic, there were factories that kept working. in Germany, for example, whereas in Italy, they stopped and they had to be stopped. We needed lockdown. Germany did not introduce a lockdown like us. And then afterwards, they went through different problems. But I think it's necessary to regulate the market. When there is an extreme situation, we need some regulation because we need to guarantee fair competition. And then there's the issue of China. I could speak for hours of China. This is a topic which I'm passionate about. And I've always been interested. It's not only the issue of COVID. We still have doubts on the origin of COVID. We know as well that there was a problem of communication between China and the other country and China and the WHO. There were Chinese doctors and researchers who weren't transparent. Some researchers disappeared. And it was impossible for international researchers to go to China to verify what happened. In any case, when we had to face the pandemic in Europe, China had already produced masks. They gave us masks, and I say this in the book, but we found out afterwards that many of these supplies were not regulated. They were not up to par. They didn't have the right standards. So I criticize the WHO because the WHO should improve some of its procedures. But the WHO continues to talk about masks, but it doesn't say they have to be mandatory when there's a public group, when you are outdoors. If there are lots of people close to each other, we still need a mask. So I think we need to review our policies. We need to review the WHO, but also the WTO, the World Trade Organization. I remember bringing this topic up as well. It was before 2010. We spoke of the WTO, of its standards and regulations. New countries entered. China is in the organization, and that has changed things. China imposes its point of view, but I think that we need to have the same rules for everyone. We can't have derogations. It's important that all the members of this organization follow the same rules. Yes, thank you, Cristiana. And so I think that after this wide introduction, we can open the debate. I would like to ask those who are not speaking to turn off their microphones to avoid echoes. So various people have asked to speak. We have Tiziana Di Simone, journalist from Rai Radio Uno. I don't see her on the video. If she could please show herself. I'd like to give her the floor. If I can see her, yes. I only have the audio. Unfortunately, I can't switch. Unfortunately, I'm not very good with this system. We've all been working with it for a year, but I'm still not very good. In any case, good afternoon and good evening to Ms. Muscardini especially. I have a question for you. I haven't read your book, so I don't know if you talk about this issue or not in the text, but I would like to know what you think about the information that was provided to citizens over this period of time as a politician, as a journalist and a writer? In your book, you remind us of the months of lockdown. So what is your impression about the information that was given to citizens in Italy, but in other countries as well? Yes, excuse me, Cristiana. I'm sorry if I interrupt. Do you mind if maybe we listen to 2-3 questions first and then I give you the floor, because otherwise we risk not having enough time. So thank you to Tiziana Di Simone, and I'll switch to English.
Alzare la mano e noi lo vediamo per darvi la
raise
parola.
your hand or ask in the chat if you wish to intervene. Now we have Lorenza Bongiorni. She asked a question. But before we have President Gil Robles, then Lorenza Bongiorni. She wants to repeat her question. President Gil Robles. We can sort of hear him. It's not perfect.
Bene, io solo volevo domandare a Cristiana.
I simply wanted to ask Cristiana, what do you think about the conference on the future of Europe? We've heard lots of things about this conference. It's not over yet. There are sessions that still need to take place in Strasbourg. We will have a document, but I would really like to see what you think about this conference. Yes, thank you. So if Lorenza is not going to be taking the floor, give the floor to Giulia Calamazzi, who cooperates for the former member association's book, but we'll talk about that later. Giulia Calamazzi. Yes, good afternoon to all. It's an honor for me to be here. Now, on the pandemics, we've heard different points of view. Some people believe that we're at the end of the pandemic. Others believe that we will go back to the situation of a few months ago. I'd like to know what you think we've learned from this pandemic. Some people say it's the biggest challenge we've faced since the Second World War.
Grazie, la parola all'onorevole
Ms. Muscardini. Microphone, please.
Microfono.
Mi sentite?
Sì,
Mi sentite?
sì.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Allora, prima di tutto, il presidente Gil Robles, come sempre, in maniera
President Gil Robles, as usual, manages with just a few words to hit the nail on the head. The conference on Europe is important because it's always important to talk, to have a dialogue, to have an exchange of positions. The positions are different, and we also listen to citizens to a certain extent. And I agree on many points with Gil Robles. We've worked in Brussels for a long time. And I agree with him, we have to be optimistic. I always say, if destiny is against me, tant pis. That's destiny's problem. We need to be open. We need to be optimistic. But in any case, we can't move too slowly. slowly but surely, of course, but if we don't hurry up a bit, our grandchildren will still be talking about the same things. We need to move forward. We need to improve the interaction between institutions and citizens. Nevertheless, I fear that if the European Council doesn't decide, because in the end, the European Council is at the heart of all issues and all decisions. If the European Council does not decide to attain this objective step by step, then Europe will have a future where it just gets lost along the way, where it doesn't move in a targeted way. The European Convention was a huge leap forward, but then it stopped there. In the end, the final result wasn't as ambitious. We had different opinions, and we had to come to common conclusions. Then we had other exchanges, but even now, there is not a political union, not even on just a few topics. For example, a health union. Now, a health union doesn't mean having a European project against cancer. Yes, that would be good, but that's not enough. As I was saying before, we need to have supplies that are shared rules, at least when there's a pandemic. That's why I think that the conference is a great initiative that we must continue, but we have to find a way to move forward more quickly in the European Council. Now, on the other question. Which union? Young people like you represent hope, because people like me still have things to say and still have things to do. But we need young people. It's young people who have to want to act, to take a different path. What is this path that we should take? I have a slogan, perhaps it's a bit simple, but my slogan is simple, is that we can't save ourselves alone. We will not survive by acting alone. Now, we've understood that, or we did understand it during the pandemic, but now we've almost forgotten. That's why I say that in the book. I myself sometimes forget certain things. I took the book, and even though I wrote it, when I flipped the pages, I noticed that there were things I had forgotten. So if we want to survive, then we have to survive all together. We have to understand that COVID was not a one-off. It can happen again. And so we have to be ready. We have to be ready. We have to find the capacity to live together. Now, to Tiziana De Simone, I'd like to thank you for all the interviews we had over the years. It's really a pleasure to hear your voice again. And I say this a bit as a journalist, because I'm also a journalist. Well, information has to inform. The problem is when information becomes a comment. Now, correct information, correct communication has to provide information and not a comment. Instead, very often there were more comments than information. You have to give the information and then comment. You can't comment without giving the information. Now, I know that newspapers sell if they give bad news. And even on TV, we see many programs like this. We have to say that radio is more careful. Radio reflects reality better. In TV, you think of the audience, you need to have a huge audience, because then you need to sell. And sometimes even researchers and scientists comment on TV. But this is not good. This is not a good way to inform citizens. Perhaps we had too much information that didn't really correspond to reality. Sometimes we got the information late, but other times it was information that was too alarming. Then, of course, I need to underline that in Milan, we say that everyone has to do what they studied for. Judges have to be judges. Bakers have to bake cakes. But what's happening now is that there is a fine line between jobs and professions. So sometimes on TV, people are giving news that are alarming or wrong. We mustn't forget the wrong messages that politicians gave or that some scientists gave. Because at a certain point, they stated that one of these vaccines should be used only on young people. And afterwards, we found out that it was best only for older people. And afterwards, they said it's good for everybody. Well, obviously, if you keep changing the message, then people will be afraid of that vaccine. So indeed, there were mistakes with the transmission of information. Yes, indeed, Cristiana, your words are very important. They help us think of what happened. We need another book, because there are many questions that haven't been answered yet. I see that Jean-Pierre Audi is also here, and Brigitte Langenhagen. If you wish to take the floor, let us know. Now we have Lucia Evangelisti, who has asked for the floor.
Wall Street International.
Yes, thank you. I write for the Wall Street International magazine. I would like to ask the author, I don't think she's spoken about it yet in the book, because we were talking about it in the beginning. I hear that you're a very pragmatic person. I would like to know what you think about the no-vaxxers. What type of information campaign should we have? How can we convince them? I know that this is a very difficult question, but I would like to hear your opinion. Raffaella Bisceglia has another question for Ms. Muscardini, I believe. Sorry, the connection is impossible. Now, on the issue of communication, very often, it was the beginning, we spoke of a virus that attacked old people who had other illnesses. So we already gave the wrong information. Then over time, except for some articles that spoke of India and Brazil, we no longer spoke of the pandemic in Africa. We almost had the impression that COVID is a pandemic, but it's a pandemic in the Western world. for the Northern Hemisphere, for industrialized countries. So I would like to hear what Ms. Muscardini has to say about that. Is what I'm saying true or not? Do you agree with me? Thank you. Reveln has asked for the floor. Reveln? We can't hear you. Can you turn the microphone on? Yes, hello, Andrea Revel. Can you hear me? Yes, we do. I'd like to say hello to Cristiana, but I know. Thanks for this invitation. This is actually linked to the question that was just raised, and it's linked to what Cristiana was saying about the economic situation. The economic situation has been hit by the pandemic, by the political stances that were taken. So China obviously now has another role. It has become an even bigger player. There is no real relationship with Europe, and this weakens us. We've seen the problems that we all have to face, with energy costs rising at all levels. So what can Europe do in order to strengthen its economic position, in order to relaunch the continent and Italy in particular? I don't think there are other requests for the floor. So before giving the floor to Ms. Muscardini, I have a question. There's no conclusion in the book. You end with some data and a few decorations. So I would like to ask you, why did you conclude with this data? Because it continues, or is this only because it's a photograph of the problem? It's a photograph of the moment, but citizens are still undergoing many problems. We all need a Europe that is ready, a Europe that can launch economic activities. Yes, on this last question, the book ends like this because I hope I don't have to add more data, even though the situation is worrying. That's what I said in the book, in the article, Patto Sociale Informazione Europa. It's the newspaper that Raffaella Biceglia is the director of. I don't use the feminine version of the word in Italian. I won't go into the gender issue and to language issues. To get back to the book, I ended it this way because I think the book is useful for people who want to remember COVID. It's not something you read before going to bed in order to relax. There's data. Data is sad. Data cannot comfort us. And then it ends on the 2nd of July, 2020, because on the 3rd of July, my dog had 7 puppies. So I was busy at that point. This is just to add a note of humor. What will I write now? I don't know. I have thousands of ideas. Sometimes I think it's useless. but you know me. I have a hard head, so perhaps I will take the pen again and resume writing. Now, on what Andrea Revel was saying, he works with families, with children from difficult families. He's interested in the more social issues. But when we talk of economics, it's like for health, we need to be ready. Europe needs to have instruments, the WTO as well. There's a huge crisis. But we see that there are no supplies. There are problems with the supply chain. We can't produce windows. We're missing lots of materials. Now, we know that it's rare earth that's the problem. We know that China has gotten the supplies. They obtain lots of things from Afghanistan. The rare earth is what we need in the world. So Europe should also do something. It should have this material. It needs supplies. Germany needs to do something. They could do it with the gas pipeline as well, because once again, we've seen this explosion in the gas prices. So we go back to what I was saying before. We need a political union. If each country only thinks of itself, then it's what I was saying. We can't survive alone. That's why the Conference of Europe is important. And let's hope that it understands the need to work together. Then Rafaela asked for another question that I really appreciate. Even though the situation is a bit different, it's not that in industrialized countries there is more COVID than in others. We see that in India, for example, there were a lot of sick people. The country is polluted, it's poor, it's rich as well. And it had a lot of COVID cases. And China is a mystery. We don't actually know. China is polluted, one of the most polluted in the world. I remember going to Beijing. I went to the hotel and I couldn't see the building opposite the street. In Africa, we don't have a lot of news from Africa. From what I know, 10 days ago, in Kenya, since the beginning, there were only, I don't like the word only, but anyway, there were only 5,300 deaths. We also know that in Africa, in many African countries, many people still live in villages. That means there is less transmission, or perhaps we don't get all the information on the deaths. But obviously, there are many aspects to consider. Now, why are there fewer cases in Africa than India? There's the same level of poverty. But if we think of Nairobi and Mombasa, then we know that there are ghettos there too. There are bidonvilles, Cairo. Even there are people living in cemeteries. I'm not a scientist. Is it because there's a different climate? Is it because in countries where there's malaria, they have different antibodies? Is it their lifestyle? I don't know. It's difficult to compare Nairobi to a village between Cairo and a small village in Egypt. Certainly, in Cairo, in South Africa, there were fewer people dying of COVID, fewer than in India, where there were millions of deaths. Now to answer Ms. Evangelista. She asked me about no vaxxers. Now I said something in the beginning when I said that we are entitled to express dissent. We are entitled to have an opinion. Luckily, we don't live in a dictatorship. We can express dissent, but it mustn't create damage. It mustn't make it possible that you block other people's freedoms. And in this case, it's the majority of the population. So the no vax can demonstrate, but keeping the distance to remain safe. How to convince them? First of all, we need to communicate in a better way. We need to communicate the data. The data states that most people in ICU units are non-vaccinated people. That they're even young people. A few days ago, a young mother of 28 died, and her child died as well. The baby died. 2 months later, the mother died. We have to communicate data on who is in the hospital, how many people are in intensive care, and how many people died, and how many of these were unvaccinated. Plus, I think that we could have a sample. We have to remember that these are not spontaneous demonstrations. In Lombardy a few days ago, there was a demonstration. And we know that behind these demonstrations, there's also an economic interest. There's people who are looking for popularity and notoriety. So I think that these demonstrations are born from people who organize them in internet. So we should get these people, we should bring them to the hospital so that they can see the patients there who are receiving oxygen. People have died and people are still dying. Not as many, luckily, but I think there are people who haven't understood the seriousness of the situation, and they are endangering themselves and others as well. But I don't think we have the right to endanger people's health because we want to express our opinion. Now, if for some reason you can't be vaccinated, but if you can be, if there are no health reasons stopping you from being vaccinated, then I don't think it's acceptable. I think it's actually a crime. And because if you go around infecting people, it's a crime. I don't think it's acceptable. I respect our constitution. Our constitution states that we have the right to health. So if a person can receive a vaccination and does it and gets sick and goes to the hospital with a huge cost because oxygen costs, it creates problem for staff. Taking the place of other patients who need those hospital bills, and these people should pay their own hospital bills. We can't do it, so let's do what the Austrians did. The Green Pass is only for vaccinated people. And with that, after these words, which make us reflect, we need to remember the need to respect other people's freedoms. We need to trust science. You can't believe in science for some things and not for others. We need to create a constructive relationship. What I'm worried about, what worries me, is that many are no-vaxxers because they want to create trouble. So I think we have to be very careful. We need to support science. It's what Cristiana was saying. We need to have respect for everyone. Now, before concluding, there is one last request for the floor. Roberta Angelilli, who wanted to say hello. Yes, what a pleasure. Hello, hello to all. I apologize. We can't see you, Roberta. I'm sorry, but I have a very bad connection, so I apologize if you can't see me. I hope you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you. So I will simply say hello to Monica, to all the participants, and especially to Cristiana. I would really like to congratulate her on her book, to express my pleasure in seeing her and in having this possibility to discuss these topics. There is this wonderful climate when we talk. It was like that in the past too, in Brussels and in Strasbourg. We would talk about these important topics. We would delve into the topics. We would share our ideas. It's always stimulating. So once again, thank you. Hello, I would like to express my respect and admiration for your work. Thank you, Roberta. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, yes, we can hear you. I would also like to thank Roberta for connecting yourself and to say hello to Ginevra as well. It's as Roberta was saying, beyond the book, let's hope that we do find a way to meet more often, to talk more often, maybe one topic at a time. I would like to thank Ms. Baldi. I have cooperated with her in the past as well. So I hope that we can continue to do things together. Now, a note of humor. I check, I'm looking for freedom, but life sometimes refuses freedom. But no vaxxers are not giving up life for themselves. They are causing a damage to other people's lives. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Because I would like to thank everyone who participated. Thank you for coming. Thanks for this opportunity to speak Dante's language. I'm even here in Florence, so I'm quite happy. So once again, thank you, Cristiana. You gave us a very interesting summary of this period of pandemic. As you rightly said, it's not only a health issue, it's a social and economic problem. We know that there was an increase in the number of suicides. We know that people were profoundly affected. Society, I'm not sure that we can say that society lacks trust, but there is that element as well. So thank you again to all, especially to our Secretary General, Elisabetta Funk, that made it possible to organize this event, and Alessandro Lombardo of the Italian office, who made it possible for us to speak Italian. So Cristiana, you even made this possible. For the first time this year, we present a book in the language of the book with Italian people who make it possible for us to speak Italian. And from now on, Librorum will respect the language of the author. So we'll obviously also have English and French, which are the official languages. So this was the last event for Librorum. Now, we discussed this topic with the first publication of our association. We've had here important people from the society. The video is called Overcoming the Pandemic. It's mine and of a professor in pharmacology, and we have Giulia Caramazzi. And you can see this video in the site www.formermembers.eu. There's a contribution from Ms. Muscardini, but also from other deputies. So that means that we can continue our dialogue. So once again, I would like to thank you all. For me, it's a real pleasure to speak Italian. I know we always speak English and French, but I want to conclude in Italian because in any case, Librorum has made this choice. Librorum is Latin. I could have spoken Latin, of course, but perhaps that would have been more difficult. So what I would like to say to everyone is arrivederci. And of course, thank you. Thank you to everyone and see you next year.